On July 19th, 1991, a group from Boy Scout troop arrived at the trailhead for Mount San Gorgonio. They were there for an overnight trip to the summit, the highest point in Southern California. The group consisted of 12 scouts and 4 adult leaders. Among them was 12-year-old Jared Negrete. Jared was a new scout on his first real mountain expedition. He was 5'2" and weighed about 150 pounds. He wasn't particularly fast, and he wasn't dressed like a seasoned climber. He was wearing a t-shirt, cotton shorts, and a pair of high-top sneakers. As the troop climbed toward the 11,500-foot peak, the thin air and steep grade began to wear on him. Jared started to lag behind the rest of the scouts. Around the 10,000-foot level, the troop reached a point roughly 1,000 feet below the summit. The group leader, seeing how much Jared was struggling, decided to have him stop. He told Jared to sit and wait at a specific spot on the trail while the rest of the scouts made the final push to the top. It was supposed to be a short wait, but when the group returned to that spot later that afternoon, Jared was nowhere to be found. What followed was a search that lasted nearly 3 weeks and involved thousands of people. It would eventually yield a few candy wrappers and a camera containing images that offered a terrifying look at a child's final hours on the mountain. The San Bernardino Mountains are beautiful, but they can be deceptive. Mount San Gorgonio is a massive block of granite, and once you get above the tree line, the landscape becomes a maze of gray rock and shifting scree. On that Friday afternoon, the temperature was high, but at 10,000 feet, the weather can shift in minutes. The decision to leave Jared behind is the central point of every discussion about this case. The troop leader intended to keep the group moving so they could reach the summit and begin their descent before dark. He believed that leaving Jared on a well-defined trail was a safe compromise. Jared was told to stay exactly where he was. In a group of 12 children, managing everyone's pace is a challenge, and the leaders likely thought the summit was closer than it actually was. When the scouts reached the peak and turned back, they expected to see Jared sitting on the same rock where they left him. Instead, the trail was empty. The scouts began a hasty search of the immediate area. They checked the brush and shouted his name, but there was no answer. Because they were miles from any communication and the sun was setting, the troop spent that first night on the mountain. They didn't have a way to call for professional help until they hiked back down the next morning. This meant Jared Negrete spent his first night in the wilderness alone, with no jacket, no food, and no water. In the mountains, temperatures at that altitude can drop into the 40s, even in July. By the time the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department received the call on Saturday morning, Jared had already been missing for nearly 18 hours. The official search began on Saturday, July 20th. Initially, the Sheriff's Department sent in a standard search and rescue team. They assumed Jared had simply wandered off the trail and would be found hunkered down in a nearby drainage. But as the first day passed without a sighting, the scale of the operation began to grow. By Sunday, the search had become one of the largest in California history. Rescuers were dealing with a massive search area. If a person walks downhill from the summit of San Gorgonio, they could end up in several different watersheds. One of the most dangerous areas is known as the Big Draw. This is a steep, rugged canyon on the north side of the mountain. It's filled with loose rock and dense timber, making it incredibly difficult to navigate. Trackers eventually found a set of footprints in the dirt that matched the tread of Jared's high-top sneakers. These tracks were located in the Big Draw area, nearly 2 miles away from where he was last seen. This was a bad sign. It meant that instead of staying put as he was told, Jared had moved. He had traveled into some of the most difficult terrain on the mountain. Experts believe Jared might have become disoriented. When you are tired, dehydrated, and alone, your brain can play tricks on you. He may have thought he saw the troop moving in the distance and tried to catch up, only to walk further into the canyon. The footprints showed a wandering pattern, suggesting he was searching for a way out rather than following a specific path. As the second night approached, the wind picked up, and clouds began to move in, making the search from the air nearly impossible. During the first week of the search, teams found a cluster of items that proved Jared had been in a specific area. They found a few empty candy wrappers, beef jerky, and fruit snacks that Jared had in his pockets. Then they found his backpack. Not far from the bag, they found a small plastic Kodak Instamatic camera. The camera was a major discovery. Investigators hoped the photos would show landmarks or give some indication of which direction Jared was heading. They rushed the film to a lab to be developed. There were 12 photos on the roll. The first half of the film showed typical scout photos, the troop at the trailhead, pictures of the trees, and the mountain scenery. But the final photos were different. They were taken at night, and they were chilling. They were mostly blurry shots of the ground and the brush, illuminated only by the camera's small flash. One photo was a close-up of Jared's face. The flash reflected in his eyes, showing him looking directly into the lens. He looked exhausted, his face smudged with dirt. Searchers believed Jared was using the camera flash to try and signal helicopters or to see what was around him in the dark. In the middle of the night, the mountain is pitch black. The flash of an Instamatic camera only reaches about 10 to 15 feet. These photos suggested a child who was terrified, stuck in the dark, and trying anything he could to get someone's attention. The fact that he eventually left the camera behind was an omen. It meant he was either moving in a panic or he was too weak to carry his belongings any further. By the middle of the second week, the search for Jared Negrete had grown to include 3,000 people. This wasn't just local volunteers. It included elite mountain rescue teams from across the western United States, military helicopters from the nearby bases, and specialized K-9 units. The searchers were working in 12-hour shifts, crawling through brush so thick they had to use machetes to clear a path. They checked every crevice and every abandoned mine shaft in the region. They used infrared sensors on the helicopters, hoping to pick up a heat signature. But the mountain is full of rocks that soak up the sun's heat during the day and radiate it back at night, creating false positives for the thermal cameras. The K-9 teams faced their own challenges. Bloodhounds are excellent at tracking, but the high altitude and dry air can make it hard for a scent to linger. The dogs would pick up Jared's scent near the backpack, follow it for a few hundred yards, and then lose it on the rocky slopes. As the 19-day mark approached, the chances of finding Jared alive were slim to none. A human body can only go so long without water, especially under the physical stress of climbing through mountain canyons. On August 6, 1991, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department made the difficult call to scale back the search. They had covered every square inch of the high probability zones multiple times. They had found his gear and his tracks, but the boy himself had vanished into the landscape. The disappearance of Jared Negrete changed the way youth organizations handle wilderness trips in California. New protocols were put in place regarding group sizes and the rule that no scout should ever be left alone, regardless of the circumstances. For the Negrete family, however, the policy changes offered little comfort. For years after the disappearance, Jared's parents, Felipe and Linda, returned to the mountain. They spoke with hikers, handed out flyers, and lobbied the sheriff's department to keep the case active. They struggled with the fact that so much evidence was found: the camera, the bag, the wrappers. Yet their son was never located. In many wilderness cases, if you find the gear, you find the person. But Jared seemed to defy that logic. There are several theories about what happened after he dropped the camera. Some believe he fell into one of the many talus slopes, piles of large boulders that can shift and settle. If a person falls into a gap between these rocks, they can be buried instantly, hidden from both ground searchers and aerial teams. Others suggest that the sheer physical exhaustion led him to find a small, hidden place to rest, where he eventually died of hypothermia, his body becoming part of the forest floor. Today, the case of Jared Negrete is open but inactive. Every few years, a hiker will report finding a scrap of cloth or an old sneaker on the slopes of San Gorgonio. But so far, none of these leads have been linked to Jared. He remains a ghost of the high country. His story is a stark reminder that the wilderness doesn't care about your plans or your experience level. It is a place where a single decision, made in the heat of a Friday afternoon, can have consequences that last forever.